Welcome to Readings in English. Here, we embrace the beauty and power of the English language, exploring stories that touch the heart and engage the mind. Whether you're a beginner or already on your English journey, our stories provide a chance to immerse yourself, learn new words, and experience language in a way that makes it memorable. Today, I'm excited to introduce our story, Echoes of a New Tongue. Join Miguel as he embarks on a life-changing journey. Arriving in a foreign city with his mother, Miguel faces the daunting challenge of learning English, not just as a skill, but as a bridge to a new life. As he encounters unexpected allies and struggles, Miguel's determination grows, showing us the resilience of the human spirit and the bonds we create through language. So sit back, listen closely, and let's dive into today's story together. Miguel clutched his mother's hand as they stepped out of the airport into the bustling city, a sea of strangers surrounding them. The weight of the journey clung to him, a mix of hope, exhaustion, and fear. His mother, leaning heavily on his arm, took small, shaky steps, her face pale. Miguel scanned their surroundings, taking in the distant skyscrapers and constant hum of voices in a language he barely understood. The sounds felt like barriers, walls that separated him from the help they so desperately needed. As they waited for a bus to the hospital, Miguel noticed signs, advertisements, and maps plastered everywhere, but he struggled to make sense of them. Everything seemed strange. The scent of food from nearby stands, the honking cars, and the hurried footsteps of people rushing by. He took a deep breath, feeling overwhelmed by the unfamiliar world that surrounded him. He turned to his mother, who looked back at him with silent reassurance, as if to say it will be all right. Their bus ride was long and uncomfortable. The English words he could read swirled in his mind like a puzzle with missing pieces. His mother's head rested on his shoulder, her breath shallow and uneven. Miguel's heart pounded with worrying, and he clung to his only certainty. He had to take care of her, no matter what it took. The hospital appeared like a fortress before them, its large glass doors sliding open and closed, inviting them in yet intimidating. They entered, and almost instantly Miguel felt like a tiny fish in an ocean he couldn't navigate. A receptionist greeted them, her tone professional yet distant. Miguel struggled to explain his mother's condition, his words broken and halting. "Please, help my mother. She is very sick," he managed, hoping the desperation in his voice would be enough to bridge the gap his words couldn't cover. The receptionist frowned, scanning his face as if to gauge his meaning. She replied in swift English, her words blending into a confusing rush. Miguel caught fragments, but couldn't make sense of them. He nodded and stammered through the conversation, his chest tightening with the realization that he might be failing his mother already. After a few agonizing minutes, a nurse guided them to a waiting area. Miguel helped his mother settle into a chair, her face growing paler as she leaned back, eyes closed. The room buzzed with low voices and beeping monitors, and he felt the enormity of his responsibility sink in. If only he could communicate better, he thought, clenching his fists. He had to learn this language. He had no choice if he was going to get her the help she needed. The hours stretched as they waited. Miguel noticed other families nearby, some speaking English with ease, others whispering in languages he didn't recognize. For the first time, he felt the weight of isolation, a profound sense of loneliness that filled every corner of his mind. He looked at his mother, who gave him a tired smile, her strength a silent reminder of what he was fighting for. Finally, a doctor approached, gesturing for them to follow. Miguel helped his mother to her feet, supporting her as they walked. The doctor spoke quickly, explaining something about tests and treatments, but Miguel could barely follow. The words slid over him like water over rocks, and he nodded, feeling helpless. The doctor handed him a sheet of paper covered in English, indicating where he should sign. Miguel hesitated, the symbols blurring before his eyes. With a heavy heart, he signed, knowing he was agreeing to something he didn't fully understand. As they were shown to a room where his mother could rest, Miguel sat beside her, holding her hand, a fierce determination building inside him. He couldn't let his ignorance of this language keep him from saving her. He would learn, whatever it took. Morning dawned, casting pale light across the hospital room as Miguel blinked awake, stiff from a night spent on an uncomfortable chair beside his mother's bed. Her breathing was slow, each rise and fall of her chest a painful reminder of her fragile state. He stretched, feeling the ache in his back, and glanced at the clock. A nurse entered, adjusting the monitors, but when Miguel attempted to ask about his mother's condition, she responded in English, too quickly for him to understand. Desperation welled up inside him, mingling with frustration. How was he supposed to protect his mother if he couldn't even understand what was happening to her? He decided to find the doctor himself and demand an explanation. Gathering his resolve, Miguel wandered through the hallways until he found a nurse station where a woman was seated, reading a chart. Her name tag read Sarah. "Please," Miguel began, his voice thick with nerves. "Doctor, need to speak. My mother." Sarah looked up, her brow furrowing. "Oh, you're the son. I'll get the doctor for you." She spoke slowly, noticing his struggle, and gestured for him to sit nearby. Relieved, Miguel took a seat, his eyes never leaving the door through which Sarah disappeared. Minutes later, Sarah returned, this time accompanied by a doctor who looked at Miguel with practiced empathy. "I understand your mother's condition," the doctor began, speaking clearly, but Miguel's heart sank as the words continued to evade him. He nodded politely, grasping only fragments, catching words like treatment and cost. The urgency on the doctor's face was clear, though, and Miguel understood enough. His mother's care depended on more than just medicine. Miguel's head was spinning as Sarah noticed his confusion. She turned to him and, in a gentler tone, asked, "Do you need help understanding this?" Her question caught him off guard. Nodding slowly, he felt the hot sting of embarrassment. Yet Sarah's expression remained kind as she took a deep breath, trying to explain in simpler terms. She described his mother's condition, the tests they planned, and the need for surgery, explaining that it would be costly. Miguel's hands tightened into fists as the enormity of it struck him. It wasn't just his mother's health on the line, but his ability to provide. He needed to understand this language if he was going to do anything for her. Sarah, seeing his struggle, hesitated before adding, "If you need, I can help you with English, just the basics, so you can understand more of what's happening here." Miguel's face lit up with relief. He accepted her offer, grateful for a moment of compassion in a world that seemed increasingly alien. Sarah offered to meet him during her lunch breaks, an offer Miguel accepted immediately. With a renewed sense of hope, Miguel returned to his mother's side, taking her hand and whispering a quiet promise, "I will learn for you." As he looked around the sterile room, Miguel felt an unusual sense of clarity. The path ahead was daunting, but now, with the kindness of a stranger, he felt that perhaps he wasn't so alone in this. The next day, Miguel ventured out into the unfamiliar neighborhood surrounding the hospital, driven by a new purpose. His goal was simple but felt monumental. He needed resources to learn English, no matter how basic. Wandering down unfamiliar streets, he finally stumbled upon a small bookstore tucked between two cafes. He entered, taking in the comforting smell of old paper and ink, and his eyes darted across the shelves, searching for something that might help him. After browsing anxiously, Miguel spotted a faded English dictionary on a bargain shelf. Beside it was an introductory grammar book. He took a deep breath, counting out the money he had left, and made his purchase, feeling a mixture of pride and trepidation as he held the books close to his chest. These thin volumes were his first weapons in a fight he had no choice but to win. That night, back at the hospital, Miguel sat by his mother's bed, flipping through the dictionary, pronouncing words in a low whisper. Each term felt like a new tool added to his limited arsenal. The words were foreign and difficult, but he forced himself to repeat them, stubbornly committed to memorizing their meanings. His mother watched him with tired but supportive eyes, her hand weakly patting his arm as if to say she understood the battle he was fighting. Miguel's routine became a balancing act. He woke early each day to review his vocabulary, writing words out phonetically in a notebook before heading to the market for work. The market was bustling, full of rapid exchanges in English and occasional Spanish, and Miguel did his best to listen in on the conversations around him. At times, he attempted to ask customers simple questions, stumbling over phrases, but determined to practice. The process was painfully slow, with many misunderstandings, but he clung to each small success. His meetings with Sarah during her lunch breaks became an anchor in his otherwise tumultuous routine. She would patiently guide him through simple phrases, helping him to pronounce words and instruct basic sentences. "Remember, Miguel," she would say, "every word you learn is a step closer to understanding." Her encouragement provided him with hope, each session feeling like a small victory that propelled him forward. One afternoon, Sarah handed him a children's book, explaining that the simple language might make it easier for him to practice reading. Miguel accepted it, feeling a pang of embarrassment mixed with gratitude. Alone in the quiet of his mother's hospital room, he opened the book and began to read aloud, struggling through each sentence. Though his progress felt excruciatingly slow, his persistence grew, bolstered by Sarah's belief in him. Each night, he continued his quiet practice, determined to master even the smallest phrases. His mother's condition weighed on him, but he clung to his mission, repeating words until they sounded right. English began to feel less like an enemy and more like a challenge he was ready to confront. A week passed, and Miguel's efforts at work intensified. His job at the market required him to interact with customers more than he was comfortable with, especially as he struggled to understand and respond in English. His boss, a middle-aged man named M.R. Garcia, seemed both amused and frustrated by Miguel's attempts to communicate with customers. "Take it slow, mister," Garcia advised, though the words were spoken in Spanish, leaving Miguel feeling both grateful and humiliated. Miguel pushed himself to keep learning, to try harder. Each morning before work, he would recite his phrases, and he began memorizing simple responses, hoping to reduce the misunderstandings. But his limited vocabulary often left him unable to answer questions from customers, and he could see their frustration growing. He forced himself to breathe through the uncomfortable interactions, knowing that each failed conversation was another lesson learned. One afternoon, an elderly customer asked him something he didn't understand, and Miguel tried to piece together a response. When the customer finally walked away, shaking her head, "Mister," Garcia approached, clapping him on the shoulder with a bemused smile. "You're getting there, Miguel. Just keep practicing." Miguel nodded, accepting the encouragement. But inside, he felt the sting of inadequacy. Still, he kept at it. He began staying late after his shift, walking through the aisles and naming each item in English to himself. Repetition became his mantra, each word feeling like a small victory when he could say it correctly, "Mister." Garcia noticed his dedication and started to offer small bits of advice, pointing out words Miguel struggled with and correcting his pronunciation. These small acts of kindness eased some of the burden, and Miguel found himself more willing to practice out loud, slowly building confidence. One evening after work, Miguel stopped by Sarah's station at the hospital. She had a small notebook for him, filled with basic phrases and commonly used words. "I wrote these down for you," she said with a gentle smile. "Maybe they'll help make things easier." Miguel accepted the notebook, overwhelmed with gratitude, and thanked her in English, using the words he had practiced. That night, he flipped through the notebook, reading each phrase aloud to himself. Words like please, thank you, sorry, and help were now becoming familiar friends rather than daunting strangers. His mother's soft smile as she listened to him practice reminded him of the reason behind his struggle. In her eyes, he saw Prida's silent acknowledgement of his efforts, her faith in him unwavering despite their challenges. The next day, at the market, Miguel tried one of the new phrases from Sarah's notebook. When a customer handed him a bill, he managed to say thank you, have a nice day, without stumbling. The customer looked surprised, then smiled, and Miguel felt a rush of satisfaction. It was a small step, but it was progress, and each day he felt more capable, more connected to the world that had once seemed out of reach. Gradually, Miguel noticed that his fear of speaking was being replaced by determination. He still made mistakes, his words often clumsy and hesitant, but he was no longer paralyzed by his lack of knowledge. Each interaction, each phrase, was a reminder of his purpose. The hospital, the market, and Sarah's steady encouragement were all becoming part of a world he was learning to navigate bit by bit, with courage he hadn't known he possessed. As the days turned into weeks, Miguel's mother's health declined more noticeably. Each time he returned from work, he could see the toll the illness was taking on her. She tried to mask her pain with a gentle smile whenever he entered the room, but Miguel could sense the growing urgency. He was constantly reminded of how high the stakes were, each moment a pressing reminder that he was racing against time. One afternoon, as Miguel sat beside his mother, a nurse entered with a chart and a list of upcoming procedures. The nurse explained that a surgery might be necessary to address her worsening condition. The words were clear but devastating. Miguel struggled to ask about the details, piecing together his limited English to understand the medical terms and the implications of the surgery. The nurse gently explained this surgery. "It is important, but it will cost a lot." Her gaze softened. Sensing his distress, Miguel's mind reeled. The cost was more than he could imagine, more than he could hope to earn with his current job. A hollow dread filled him as he realized that providing for her care would be even harder than he had anticipated. Leaving the hospital, Miguel walked the streets aimlessly, his thoughts churning. His mother had sacrificed everything to give him a chance at a better life, and now it was his turn to make sacrifices. The pressure of responsibility weighed heavily on him, making each step feel like a burden. He needed more work, more resources, but most of all, he needed to understand enough English to navigate this complex world. When he finally returned to the hospital that evening, he found his mother awake, her hand reaching out weakly toward him. He took her hand and sat beside her, pressing his forehead to her fingers, his mind racing through possible solutions. His heart was set. He would find a way to afford her care. His mother looked at him, her eyes full of understanding and a silent, unspoken reassurance that they would get through this together. With renewed determination, Miguel poured himself into his work and studies with relentless focus. Each day brought him a little closer to his goal, and though the path was grueling, he found himself clinging to any small progress as a victory. Sarah continued to help him during lunch breaks, teaching him practical phrases he could use in both the hospital and the market. She had a way of breaking down difficult concepts, making the language feel less like a barrier and more like a tool he could master. One afternoon, as they sat together, Sarah handed him a small card with phrases he could use to ask about his mother's treatment. "These might help when you're speaking to the doctors," she explained. Miguel accepted it gratefully, his fingers tracing the words as he repeated each phrase under his breath. The words felt awkward, like unfamiliar steps in a dance, but he was determined to make them his own. The following day, Miguel's mother needed to undergo a test, and he felt a surge of nervousness as they entered the examination room. He took a deep breath, recalling the phrases he had practiced, and approached the nurse. "Can you explain the test?" "I need to know what happens," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves simmering beneath. The nurse looked surprised, but nodded, explaining the procedure slowly and clearly. Miguel listened intently, understanding enough to follow along. For the first time, he felt a sense of control, a confidence that he was beginning to grasp the essentials. When he returned to the waiting area, Sarah was passing by and spotted him. She smiled when he shared the encounter, his pride evident in the way he described how he had understood the nurse's words. "You're really learning, Miguel," she said, her tone warm. "Every word you know brings you closer to helping your mother." Her encouragement gave him strength, and he found himself pushing forward with renewed purpose. That night, back at the hospital room, Miguel shared the experience with his mother, who listened, her smile faint but proud. The small victory, though minor, meant everything to him. For the first time, he felt hope that he could overcome the language barrier and stand as a true advocate for his mother's health. He sat by her side, holding her hand, silently promising her that he would do whatever it took to keep making progress, one word at a time. The following week brought a harsh reality to Miguel's plans. Despite his growing confidence in speaking English, he was no closer to covering the cost of his mother's surgery. His job at the market, while consistent, barely provided enough for daily expenses, let alone medical bills. Late one evening, Mr. Garcia, his boss, noticed Miguel's quiet frustration. "You work hard, Miguel," Mr. Garcia said, setting down a box he had been sorting. "But I can see you need more than this job can give," Miguel nodded, trying to mask his worrying. "My mother's surgery, it costs a lot," he explained, stumbling slightly over the words. He appreciated Mr. Garcia's understanding, but the weight of his struggle felt as heavy as ever. Mr. Garcia paused thoughtfully. "Maybe I can help you find some extra work," he offered. "I have a friend who runs a restaurant downtown. They're looking for help in the evenings." "It won't be easy, but it could give you what you need." Miguel accepted the offer with gratitude, understanding that it meant sacrificing even more of his time and energy. He started the new job that week, working double shifts at the market during the day and at the restaurant by night. The long hours took a toll on him physically, and there were moments when he wondered if he could sustain this pace. But every time he thought about his mother's recovery, he reminded himself of the stakes. He had come too far to give up. Now the restaurant was a new challenge. It was loud and chaotic, filled with orders shouted in rapid English. Miguel struggled to keep up, fumbling through requests and sometimes misunderstanding orders, but he persevered, staying late to clean up after each shift and practicing his English with the kitchen staff when he could. Each night, he returned to the hospital, exhausted but determined, sitting by his mother's bed and recounting his day to her. She listened, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern, knowing the sacrifice he was making. The pressure was unrelenting, yet Miguel saw every shift and every word learned as another step closer to ensuring her well-being. After a particularly difficult shift at the restaurant, Miguel found himself lingering outside, feeling the weight of his long hours and limited sleep. As he walked back to the hospital, he noticed a community center nearby with a sign advertising free English classes. Intrigued, he decided to step inside, hoping to find resources that could help him improve his skills even further. Inside, he was greeted by a diverse group of people from various backgrounds, all gathered for the same purpose: to learn English. For the first time, Miguel felt a sense of belonging among people who understood the struggle of adapting to a foreign language. The group was led by an older woman named Mrs. Thompson, who welcomed each newcomer with patience and kindness. She introduced him to a few others in the class, and they shared stories of their journeys, some of them even more challenging than his own. Miguel quickly bonded with a young man named Ahmed, who had recently moved from Egypt. Like Miguel, Ahmed was working multiple jobs to support his family and learning English in the little free time he had. The two became fast friends, often sitting together in class and practicing phrases outside of it. Their shared experiences created a camaraderie that Miguel hadn't known he was missing. The group sessions became a source of comfort and strength. Each class, Mrs. Thompson would encourage them to use English to tell personal stories, allowing them to connect not only through language, but also through shared humanity. Miguel began to look forward to these meetings, finding that they brought him a renewed sense of hope. He wasn't alone in this journey. There were others who understood the weight he carried. Sarah continued to support him at the hospital, and with each small achievement, his determination only grew. Through his new friendships and the encouragement of his classmates, Miguel felt his confidence building. English was no longer just a tool he needed to navigate the hospital. It was becoming a bridge to connect him to others, to a community he hadn't realized he was part of. As he returned to the hospital that night, Miguel reflected on the kindness he had received and the friendships he had formed. His journey was still filled with uncertainty, but with each lesson, he was carving a path not only toward helping his mother, but toward building a new life. With the second job and the English classes, Miguel's days grew longer and more demanding. He barely slept, squeezing in only a few hours of rest between his shifts at the market and the restaurant. Every evening, he went to the hospital to see his mother, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but his spirit remained unbreakable. He shared his daily victories with her, each new English phrase he learned and each small improvement in her condition giving him the energy to keep going. One evening, as he sat by her side, Miguel noticed his mother's concerned gaze lingering on him. Her fingers gently traced the dark circles under his eyes, her silent expression speaking volumes. Miguel forced a smile, squeezing her hand, but he knew she could see the toll his sacrifices were taking. He wished he could reassure her, tell her it was only temporary, but he couldn't hide the reality of their situation. He needed to work to cover her treatment, and there was no room for compromise. Despite the strain, Miguel found solace in his classes at the community center. There, he could momentarily forget the weight of his responsibilities, allowing himself to focus solely on learning and connecting with others. He began helping Ahmed with phrases they practiced in class, and Ahmed, in turn, taught him words in Arabic, sharing stories from his homeland. These exchanges became a cherished part of Miguel's week, offering a brief escape and a reminder of the strength that came from unity. One evening after a particularly long day, Sarah caught up with him at the hospital. She had been observing his struggle with growing concern, and though she admired his dedication, she worried about his health. "Miguel," she said gently, "you're doing so much, but you can't keep going without any rest. You need to take care of yourself, too." Miguel looked down, embarrassed but grateful for her concern. "I can't stop," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I stop, my mother's treatment will be delayed," Sarah sighed, understanding the depth of his dilemma. She handed him a small, neatly wrapped package. "Here, a little energy boost," she said with a smile. Inside, Miguel found some snacks, and a small notebook with English phrases she had written down for him. Her kindness was a reminder that he wasn't alone in this, even if the journey felt isolating at times. That night, as he walked back to the hospital, Miguel clutched the notebook, a renewed sense of resolve filling him. He would keep going, no matter the cost, knowing that each sacrifice he made brought him one step closer to securing a future for his mother. As the weeks dragged on, Miguel's body began to show signs of exhaustion. He pushed through his shifts, often running on only a few hours of sleep, until one evening he felt an overwhelming dizziness at the restaurant. His vision blurred, and before he could steady himself, he collapsed, hitting the floor with a dull thud. He awoke to the concerned faces of his co-workers, their voices muffled as they tried to bring him to his senses. Embarrassed and weak, Miguel tried to stand, insisting he was fine, but his manager urged him to go home and rest. The walk back to the hospital felt like an eternity, his body protesting with every step. He had pushed himself too far, and his body was rebelling against the relentless pace he had been maintaining. When he finally arrived at the hospital, Sarah saw his pale face and immediately approached him, her expression filled with worry. "Miguel, what happened?" she asked, guiding him to a chair. I am just tired," he managed, though he could barely keep his eyes open. His strength was waning, but he felt an urge to reassure her, even if he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Sarah shook her head, her voice firm but caring. "You can't keep doing this. You're no help to your mother if you're risking your own health. We'll figure something out," Miguel nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude mixed with frustration. He knew she was right, but he couldn't afford to slow down. As much as he wanted to rest, his mother's treatment depended on his efforts, and he had no other choice but to keep going. The following day, Miguel made the difficult decision to reduce his hours at the restaurant, compromising his earnings, but ensuring he would have enough energy to continue working and studying English. His co-workers noticed the change, some of them offering to cover his shifts when possible, their quiet acts of support helping to ease his burden. Miguel's dedication, though straining, had earned the respect of those around him at the community center, Mrs. Thompson noticed his exhaustion and offered him more flexible class times, allowing him to attend sessions when he had more energy. Each concession felt like a small victory, a reminder that even in his darkest moments, he was surrounded by people who understood and cared. As he sat by his mother's bed that evening, Miguel whispered his plans to her, his voice steady despite his fatigue. He promised her that he would be there for her, no matter how hard things became. His mother, though frail, gave him a nod of encouragement, her silent strength fueling his resolve. Miguel took her hand, feeling a profound sense of determination returning to him. He would overcome this for her and for the future they both deserved. Miguel's exhaustion weighed heavily on him, but he couldn't let it overshadow his resolve. He had reached a point where he knew he couldn't manage the medical expenses alone, even with his 2 jobs. The need for financial help was no longer avoidable. With hesitant courage, Miguel approached Sarah one afternoon, hoping she might know of some resources that could assist him. As he explained his situation, Sarah listened intently, her expression a mix of empathy and determination. "Miguel, there are assistance programs at the hospital," she said thoughtfully, "but they're complex to apply for and usually require documentation and detailed explanations." All in English. Miguel felt his heart sink, but he quickly steadied himself. "I want to try," he replied, his voice resolute. "I'll do my best to understand. I'll fill out everything myself if I have to." Sarah gave him a reassuring nod. "I'll help you with the forms and get the necessary paperwork. We can go over it together." The next morning, Miguel and Sarah met in a quiet corner of the hospital's cafeteria, the forms spread out between them. Sarah walked him through each section, explaining terms and translating where she could. Miguel listened carefully, his hand gripping a pen as he filled in each blank, making sure he understood every word. The process was slow, but his determination fueled him. As they worked, Miguel couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability. Asking for help wasn't easy, and having to explain his situation felt like baring his soul. But he knew that this was the only way forward. His mother needed him to do this, and he wouldn't let pride stand in the way. After hours of filling out forms and compiling information, they reached the final page. Miguel felt a surge of relief as he signed his name, his fingers trembling slightly. Sarah patted his shoulder. "You did great, Miguel. Now we just have to wait for the response." Days passed, and Miguel felt a growing anxiety, the uncertainty gnawing at him each time he visited the hospital. Every time he caught sight of Sarah, he felt a flicker of hope, hoping she might have news. Finally, one evening, she approached him with a letter in hand, her expression cautiously optimistic. "The hospital has reviewed your application," she said, handing him the envelope. Miguel opened it, his hands shaking. The letter confirmed partial assistance, enough to cover a significant portion of the surgery costs. It wasn't everything, but it was a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in a dark tunnel. Miguel's eyes filled with gratitude as he thanked Sarah, struggling to find the words. Her smile was warm, and for the first time he felt the weight lifting just a bit. He had taken a chance, asked for help, and his efforts were finally paying off. News of Miguel's situation spread quietly through the hospital, thanks to Sarah and a few others who were moved by his story. Soon, Miguel noticed small acts of kindness emerging from unexpected places. A nurse left a few extra blankets by his mother's bed to keep her warm at night. The cafeteria staff offered him a free meal here and there, a small but meaningful gesture that helped ease his burden. One evening, as he sat in the hospital lobby with a worn notebook in hand, a man in a janitor's uniform approached him. The man introduced himself as Roberto and shared that he, too, had come to this country with little English and faced hardships when his wife had fallen ill years ago. "You remind me of myself, Miguel," Roberto said with a warm smile, handing him a small envelope. Inside were a few dollars, enough for a meal or a bus fare. Miguel hesitated, overwhelmed by the generosity, but Roberto waved off his gratitude. "It's not much," he said, "but it's a start. And one day you'll be able to help someone else, too." Moved by the gesture, Miguel accepted the envelope, feeling a warmth he hadn't felt in months. His journey had been a struggle, but these small acts of kindness reminded him that he wasn't alone. People understood his pain and wanted to support him. The community center also became a place of encouragement. His friends in the English class, upon learning of his situation, collected small donations. Ahmed handed him a sealed envelope with a grin. "From all of us," he said, his voice full of sincerity. The contributions were modest, but to Miguel, they represented so much more than money. They were symbols of solidarity, reminders of the humanity that connected them all. His heart swelled with gratitude as he accepted each contribution, humbled by the generosity of strangers turned friends. Returning to the hospital that night, Miguel shared the news with his mother, her eyes lighting up with a mixture of pride and relief. She squeezed his hand, her touch conveying all the words she couldn't say. Miguel knew that these acts of kindness were more than just temporary relief. They were glimpses of the life he hoped to build, one filled with compassion, friendship, and community. With renewed hope and support from those around him, Miguel's resolve strengthened. He knew there were still challenges ahead, but now he felt equipped to face them, bolstered by the knowledge that he was part of something bigger. He would overcome this for his mother and for the life they had both fought so hard to create. The day of his mother's surgery arrived sooner than Miguel anticipated. Anxiety gnawed at him as he sat by her bedside in the early hours of the morning, his hands clasped tightly around hers. She looked at him, a weak but reassuring smile on her face, as if to comfort him despite her own fears. Miguel forced a smile back, trying to be strong for her, but his heart was pounding. As nurses prepared her for surgery, Miguel tried to mask his unease. His limited English felt more like a barrier than ever, making it difficult for him to understand the full details of the procedure. Sarah was there, explaining each step to him as best as she could, offering words of comfort that steadied his nerves. Her presence was a calming force in the whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. Finally, the time came for Miguel to let go of his mother's hand as the nurses wheeled her away. He stood by the door, watching her disappear down the hallway, and felt a wave of helplessness wash over him. It was a feeling he had become all too familiar with, but this time it felt deeper, more profound. His mother was everything to him, and her well-being was now in the hands of others. The hours that followed were agonizingly slow. Miguel paced the waiting room, his mind racing with a mix of fear and hope. Memories of their life back home surfaced, moments when she had been his strength, guiding him through life's challenges. Now, it was his turn to be strong for her. He clenched his fists, silently praying for her recovery. Throughout the day, familiar faces from the community center stopped by to check on him. Ahmed arrived, bringing coffee and sitting with him in silence, a steady presence that made Miguel feel less alone. Even Roberto, the janitor, passed through on his break, giving Miguel a reassuring nod and a warm pat on the back. Their support wrapped around him like a comforting blanket, a reminder that he wasn't facing this moment alone. As the hours dragged on, Miguel's exhaustion began to take hold. His mind drifted between hope and despair, clinging to the promise he had made to his mother to be there for her, no matter the outcome. He glanced at the clock, feeling every minute stretch painfully. Just when he thought he could wait no longer, a nurse approached, her expression calm but serious. "The surgery went well," she said, her voice soft and steady. Relief flooded over Miguel, and he felt his knees nearly give way as he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The nurse explained that his mother was being moved to recovery and that he could see her soon. Miguel sat back down, the weight of the past weeks lifting ever so slightly. The ordeal wasn't over, but they had overcome a major hurdle. He felt a new surge of hope, grateful not only for the successful surgery, but for the support he had received from people who had become like family. Miguel's heart raced as he was finally allowed to see his mother in the recovery room. She looked frail and tired, her eyes closed, but her breathing was steady. He sat beside her, taking her hand, his chest swelling with a mix of relief and gratitude. He had waited so long for this moment, and now he felt a sense of peace settle over him. As the hours passed, Miguel remained by her side, watching her slowly regain strength. Nurses checked her vitals, and each time they smiled and nodded, Miguel felt his worries ease. Sarah visited briefly, her face lighting up when she saw the improvement in his mother's condition. "She's doing well, Miguel," Sarah assured him. "You did everything you could for her, and now she has a chance to recover fully," Miguel thanked her, his voice filled with emotion. He knew he owed much of his progress not only to his hard work, but to the people who had supported him along the way. The kindness of others had bridged the gaps that language alone couldn't fill, and he was beginning to see that his journey was as much about community as it was about personal strength. When his mother finally opened her eyes, Miguel felt a wave of relief so intense that he struggled to hold back tears. She looked at him, her gaze full of gratitude and pride, and whispered his name. Miguel leaned closer, listening as she murmured, "Thank you, my son." Those words, simple yet profound, affirmed everything he had fought for. Over the following days, Miguel balanced his shifts with time spent at the hospital, assisting his mother in any way he could. Each moment felt like a victory, a testament to their resilience. Sarah continued to visit, bringing small gifts to brighten his mother's day, while friends from the community center sent messages of support. Their love and care became an integral part of Miguel's journey, filling the hospital room with warmth and hope. One afternoon, Ahmed came to visit, bringing a few of the classmates from their English sessions. They sat together, sharing laughter and stories, filling the room with a sense of belonging. Miguel realized that, in his quest to learn English and provide for his mother, he had gained something even greater. A community had embraced him as one of their own. As his mother grew stronger, Miguel's heart swelled with gratitude for everyone who had played a role in their journey. He promised himself that he would find a way to give back, to support others who, like him, needed a helping hand. The challenges they had faced had not broken him. They had transformed him, instilling a newfound resilience and compassion. Miguel looked at his mother, knowing that they were both stronger for the struggles they had endured. Their journey was far from over, but they had made it through one of the hardest parts, and he knew that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, supported by a community that had become family. In the weeks following the surgery, Miguel's mother grew stronger each day. Her color returned, and her laughter, faint at first, soon filled the small hospital room, echoing the relief and joy Miguel felt inside. His schedule, once frantic and overwhelming, had become manageable. He balanced his shifts at the market, attended evening English classes, and spent every free moment by his mother's side. Life, though challenging, was finally beginning to feel hopeful. Miguel had become something of a familiar face at the hospital, known for his persistence and quiet dedication. Staff members greeted him warmly, and some even stopped to practice English with him, encouraging his progress. Miguel found himself speaking with growing confidence, grateful for every word he had learned and every interaction that had brought him closer to fluency. One afternoon, as his mother was being discharged, Sarah pulled him aside. "You've come a long way, Miguel, and I think it's time to think about what's next. Have you thought about working somewhere that lets you use your English more?" Miguel considered her words, feeling a thrill at the possibility. He had gained so much more than language skills. He had found his voice and a purpose. Now, with his mother on the road to recovery, he felt ready to move forward. As they left the hospital, Miguel held his mother's hand tightly. She looked around, breathing in the crisp air with a renewed sense of life. They walked to their modest apartment, and Miguel helped her settle in, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace and accomplishment. This was their fresh start, the moment he had fought so hard to reach. That evening, Miguel sat alone, reflecting on everything he had endured. He knew he wanted to help others, especially newcomers who faced the same struggles he had once known. He decided to approach the community center where he had learned so much with an idea he had been nurturing for some time. The next day, Miguel met with Mrs. Thompson at the community center, his heart pounding with both nerves and excitement. "I want to volunteer," he said, his voice steady. "I want to help others who are learning English, like you all helped me." Mrs. Thompson's face lit up and she nodded. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Miguel. There are many people here who could benefit from your story and experience." As he left the center, Miguel felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had come so far, and now he was ready to give back, to help others the way he had been helped. His journey had not only transformed him, but had equipped him to be a guide for others. Weeks later, Miguel stood in front of a small group of newcomers at the community center, feeling both nervous and excited. These were people who, like him, had arrived in a foreign land with little knowledge of English. They looked at him with anticipation, and Miguel saw in their faces the same determination and fear he had once known. He took a deep breath, smiling as he introduced himself in English, his voice clear and steady. "Hello, my name is Miguel. When I came here, I didn't know English, just like many of you. It was hard, but I learned it, and I know you can too." He paused, allowing the words to settle, watching as their expressions softened as hope replaced uncertainty. Miguel guided them through simple phrases, the way Sarah had once guided him. He shared practical advice, small tricks he had learned along the way, and most importantly, his story of resilience. His journey, once a struggle, was now a source of strength and inspiration. As he looked around the room, he saw the impact of his words in their eyes, the light of understanding sparking as they repeated phrases and shared laughter over mispronunciations. Ahmed, his friend from English class, sat in the back, grinning with pride. "You're a natural, Miguel," he said afterward, clapping him on the back. Miguel felt a surge of pride and gratitude, realizing that he had not only overcome his own challenges, but had found a way to turn his experiences into a gift for others. Over time, Miguel's classes grew, and he became a cherished mentor at the community center, someone people could turn to for support and guidance. His mother often attended his sessions, her face beaming with pride, a living testament to the battles they had fought together. Miguel's journey had transformed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had arrived in a new country, isolated by language and culture, but through persistence, kindness, and the support of strangers turned friends, he had built a life defined by purpose and connection. He had found his place not only in the community, but in the hearts of those he helped. As he closed his class one evening, he glanced around the room, feeling an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. His story had come full circle. He was no longer the man struggling to understand, lost in a sea of foreign words. He was part of a community, a bridge for others, a reminder that, with hope and determination, anything was possible. In that moment, Miguel knew that his journey had only just begun. He had discovered that language wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a bridge to understanding, a path to belonging, and a gift he was now honored to share.